They need $1 trillion of investment to meet these demands. So that's the demand side. Then let's look at supply. Gold and any mineral, as we know, is finite in nature. It doesn't replenish itself. If only it did, we'd be a lot happier than we are today. But what you see there is really a risk profile that was drawn up by an independent socio-political advisor, Maplecroft. And what it does is it identifies the socio-political economic risks prevalent in various countries. Now, green is obviously good in terms of risk. Red is obviously bad. If you look at the green blobs, I mean, you have Australia, which is around. It's obviously there's a lot of competition there, and the opportunities there are few and far between. You head up into the northern hemisphere, and the EU is obviously fairly well regulated, but clear in terms of mining. The problem is it's over-regulated, and there are not enough resources there. You then fly over the Atlantic into North America, and what happens there, the quality of the assets, particularly, well, I mean, in Canada, they're mining some pretty low-grade stuff, as well as the competition. So how's the mining industry responded? We've got all these global demands. We need to produce. You're getting everyone going into riskier jurisdictions. You've got all the big names in all the tough countries. You've got Kinross in Russia, Rio Tinto in Mongolia, Barrick in Pakistan, Rio Tinto again in Zimbabwe, a whole host of big players in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And then in South America, you've got Anglo American in Venezuela, and then Colombia with Anglo Gold. So mining companies are being forced more and more into riskier jurisdictions to try and meet the demand. What else does it come with, though? You've got obviously a much greater emphasis on human safety. Goldfield's slogan is, if we cannot mine safely, we will not mine. The world has changed in terms of the value of safety and health, and mining has changed as such as well in the last 10 years. You know, from the building of the Panama Canal, 28,000 deaths that went, I wouldn't say unnoticed, but fairly well unreported, into the great rescue attempt that was made through Marion Roberts and various others in Chile, rescuing those 33 trapped miners, which was around the world. I think it just shows you the level of commitment that now is being thrown into safety. The other then is obviously on the activism side. I guess, yeah, who's afraid of Twitter? We're all afraid of Twitter, especially in the second highest social networking country in the world. So, yeah, I mean, communities stop mines. And in terms of reputation, that's also become a consideration. So what does that, all mean? We've also got these things, and I'm not going to talk about best practices today. We all subscribe to best practices. We're all guided by it. We fully agree with it, and I don't really want to talk about it in a lot of detail today because it's been done. But Goldfield subscribes to all of these best practices, and it's making our business a lot more sustainable. But it is another challenge. So where are we? I mean, we're walking this road. We've got a lot of supply, demands. You've got demands on your minerals. You've got supply issues. You've got NGO scrutiny. You've got reputational issues, political and social license to operate, community stop mines. You've got to comply with all the stringent legislation, international standards, and at the same time make money for your shareholders. It's not an easy world we live in, but the world has changed. And to me and to Goldfields, and I guess to most of the mining industry, what is the only solution? The only solution is to make sustainable development part of our DNA. It's no longer a strategy, it's our way of doing business. And Goldfields fully subscribes to that. And I know the mining industry in general fully subscribes to that, but I'm not going to preach to the converted in many respects. So I'd like to just give you a localized view of Goldfield Sustainable Development in Peru. As I mentioned, we bought the Cerro Corona deposit from the Gubbins family in December 2003. The history, obviously, is it's very high elevation. Goldfield prides itself as being the company that mines at 4,500 meters underground and 4,500 meters above ground. So it's very high elevation, extreme poverty, as you can see from the picture. People relied very heavily on subsistence farming, and being a mining area, there was a huge amount of distrust and negativity. It was one of Goldfield's first moves into expanding its international portfolio. So from a sustainable development point of view, we looked at it as an opportunity to showcase what we could do and integrate sustainable development into the way we did things. So in Peru, and I mean, we'll talk about the model that's applied in the Philippines, but they spoke about the merging of social, environmental, and economic capital. These are just some of the examples. I mean, on the economic side, we targeted local employment, which most people do. I think the important thing, though, is we forged contracting companies, and there are now 65 active ones that are servicing the mine. On a social capital perspective, we entered into partnerships with local governments, and I'll talk about how we've done that in the Philippines as well. We pumped a lot of money into health and education. And then lastly, on the environmental side, we had agreements with the community not to draw water from their rivers, and we entered into a massive reforestation process. And what this has done is it's really helped turn that community around and really made Peru's a pretty tough place. I'm sure you've all read about, Humala's come in. There's a strong social side of things. There have been protests, blockades, and throughout it all, Cerro Corona's done a fairly good job of keeping operating. So the model worked, and it just shows that with the right amount of involvement, you can get it right. Okay, so let's localize it again and get into the Philippines. Now, I guess, none of us really need to talk too much about the difficulties and the problems faced in the Philippines, and we're not going to be so naive as to say that there aren't still going to be a lot of problems ahead, regardless of how we conduct ourselves. But what we have to do, and what we believed we had to do upon entry, was actually ascertain what needed to be done differently to try and give ourselves the best chance of success. Now, please don't get me wrong, I'm not advocating that this is, there's a guaranteed success, because I think we all know that there are issues that may run against that. But what we tried to do was really put in place a system that would give us the best chance of success. And it started with a team, obviously. We had Goldfields and Lepanto. We then invited a whole group of international and local experts. So it was headed up by our sustainable development independent consultants, Maplecroft. They're internationally widely regarded. We then had local input from BMP, Aircom, and then obviously some of the big technical advisors as well, and then the Goldfields SD group. So we got everyone together, and we followed a process which we're applying now to FSC. Excuse the elementary look of this, but this was the process. So step one really was to identify the risks. So we spent a lot of time in terms of desktop studies, interviews, talking to various people, identifying what the risks are in the Philippines, specifically where we were operating, and trying to really be true to ourselves and say, okay, well, what is the magnitude of the task we need to deal with? And what we came up with was a list, or I call it a dashboard, of 31 major issues, okay? And these are kind of in 5 buckets, as I call them. You've got community, environment, our own employees, operations, and license to operate. So this was the result, the end result of a 12-week process involving a lot of people putting their minds together, trying to address what the issues are. We came up with 31 dashboard items. The next step then was to determine the risks commensurate with each of the items. So what were more pressing issues to deal with? I still lose sleep at night, but I wouldn't sleep at all if I had to address all the issues and if we had to address all the issues. So I think the key was trying to understand, well, what are the hot issues to address now, what needs to start immediately, and what can come later. So the key then was the determination of risks. And I guess what we have here is really, you've all seen risk maps, but on the vertical column here, you have the risk, okay? So obviously, the further you go up, the less risky it is. Down here in the bottom left-hand quadrant is your very risky jurisdictions. And then on the horizontal axis, you have management's proficiency to deal with the risk. So obviously, what we wanted to do in the beginning was target where all the risk was and where we needed to put management proficiency to deal with each of the risks. What was more important to deal with at each stage? Now, I think the important thing to note, and we all saw the map in terms of political association, any particular risk, a low risk, any particular risk in a low-risk country would, by virtue of the fact that it's in a low-risk country, be higher up and therefore less risk. Higher-risk countries are, the same issue in a high-risk country is obviously going to be higher risk. Sorry, that's not really Logic 101, but that's what it is. And I think the point to recognize, though, is that even in some high-risk countries, you're never going to get out of this quadrant. But the idea is recognizing it and putting in place measures to address it. And that's what it's the realization from a global company that we actually need to learn to operate in these quadrants. And as much as we try, and yes, we're obviously going to try and push things out here, it's how well you manage the risk inside that quadrant that's important. So out of the dashboard, the 32 buckets are identified here. For obvious reasons, I haven't highlighted what each one is, but you see a lot of issues, as you'd expect, in the bottom quadrant, and a few potential opportunities there where we can get some traction. The last step then was to get everyone together and say, okay, these are the issues, these are the risks, how are we going to deal with them? What are we going to do? What's the team? How's it going to happen? We flew our whole Goldfield's SD team here for a 2-week workshop, and we sat down and came up with recommendations for each of the dashboard items and each of the issues. And we came up with basically, how many? I think it's 641 recommendations. And those relate to, as you can see, you have the pillar, the issue, the action. So you'll see for any dashboard item, there can be, in some instances, they're up to 40. Who's responsible for it, who helps, and when you begin and when you end. And basically, that's the end result, is understanding the magnitude of the task and what needs to be addressed at what stage. So that's the process that's been followed at FSE. And we try and address the risk on that basis. Just finally, on a more localized level again, we've got to have a look at what we're actually doing. It's all very good and well to have some theoretical discussion about the potential way of doing things, but what we're doing. So in terms of FSC, and we've relied very strongly on our partner Lepanto, who've obviously been there for 75 years, and relied very strongly on them. The first thing we did as a team was to engage with the Benguet State University. We went out with 340 volunteers and did an independent house-to-house survey of all 7,346 households in the region of about 34,000 people to understand what the issues were. So what are the issues on the ground? What are the assets of the people? I think mining companies often make the mistake of telling people what they need and giving people what the mining company thinks they need. The idea here is really trying to understand the people you're dealing with and trying to look at what they have rather than what they don't have. And what we then did was we worked with each of the 105 sitios, each of the 12 barangays, and with the municipal council, as well as the Benguet State University, to come up with a community development plan, which is actually a requirement for each of the municipal councils in any municipality. Off the back of that, we fine-tuned that plan and with stakeholders introduced that into the communities. And then we, as part of our continuous engagement, support those plans. The idea really is to give people, we call it planning for exit. It sounds very strange. Why would you plan to leave? But that's what we need to do. We need to plan to leave people in a better place than what they are before we arrive. So that's really our strategy here, and that's the way we've done things. So as a final slide, and just talking about the various things we need to look at in terms of sustainable development, but on the ground in terms of the community, we've got 12 key areas, and I'll just quickly take you through some of them. I realize everyone presents their community projects, and yeah, we're going to do the same, but I guess what I wanted to get across was that there's some method in the madness. We're trying to understand what's required on the ground, what the people have, and what's going to help our exit easier for the people on the ground. So if you walk through each of the 12, I mean, in terms of human, we have educational and health programs. The culture is very important. We're up in the Cordilleras, the people of the mountain, very, very important for them in terms of culture. We try to promote culture through music, dance, choirs, that type of thing. Community infrastructure to support their activities. On the information side, we've provided access to IT. I think at times my IT officer thinks I need more access to IT. But yeah, we've done that through the provision of computers and training, obviously, that goes with that. In terms of social, as I've mentioned, we've really tried to align very closely with friendly NGOs as well as regulatory and government institutions. So in a lot of them, we've hooked up, with the Red Cross, a single drop for safe water, who are running our water process, and obviously the universities and regulators. On the political side, we've obviously tried to engage, not get too involved, but engage. On the natural resources, as I mentioned, we have a WASH program. Financial, we've run financial management programs, teaching people how to manage their money. The important thing is, with these royalties, you have a big cash injection into communities, and that has obvious knock-on effects. And unless people know how to manage correctly, you're going to have a select few people with Ferrari dealerships on every corner, rather than coming up with what's really important and sustainable. On the security side, we hooked up with the Red Cross again and rolled out disaster and preparedness. In terms of organizational maturity, we obviously develop and support organizations within the community, including women organizations, which our team do really well. And then obviously on the reputational side, building a brand, building a name, and hoping to give ourselves the best chance of success. So that's Far Southeast. That's what we're doing from a technical point of view, from a sustainable development point of view, and thanks very much for giving us the opportunity to speak today. Thank you.
My name is Sinovio Shish. I'm with Citibank here in Makati, Philippines. And my question is related to the sustainability. Basically, what are the biggest environmental risks that you see drilling so deep into the ground, and how is the community responding to it, and what are your plans for that?
Challenges that we're looking at, especially up there, probably water quality, and we've hired a lot of water experts. We've got our environmental manager is actually an expert in water management, and that's one of the reasons we got his expertise in. So yeah, it'll be groundwater, and then obviously the water that comes from the underground operations. As I mentioned before, there's potential for some of the deleterious minerals, and we're looking very closely at that with the community.
Everybody in the room basically is part of the choir that you're singing to. We all understand the benefits and the opportunities for the country and the people in responsible mining. But the elephant that's not in the room are the guys who object the church, the churches, some of the NGOs, people whose ignorance is as amazing as the potential for mining, responsible mining. Are these people not willing to come and talk to you guys in public at venues like this to ask their questions so that you can try to satisfy their fears, their bigotry or ignorance? How do you get them into the picture? Because they will be there to block you, and that would be a shame.
Brian, I agree. It obviously would be a shame. I think the way is, we need to go to them, and that's what we are doing. We're actively engaging with the NGOs on the ground. We all know, obviously, there's certain fundamentalists that you're never going to turn and that are never going to change. And that's where, I guess, like TVI, you rely on your community to support you and dilute that influence. But I think you're right. They are one of our key stakeholders, and people that do need to be listening at the efforts that are being taken to ameliorate their issues and concerns. So are we engaging with them? Yes. In public forums? No. But we'll continue to engage with them. And like I said, we've got to really do our best to give this thing the best chance of success.